Shadow of Truth with your host Dave Kranzler from investmentresearchdynamics.com and Rory Hall from thedailycoin.org. And today is Thursday, June the 11th, and we will be covering China's and India's solar program and the impact that this will have on the silver market. And we're going to bring our returning guest, Mr. Jeff Brown, out of Beijing, China. Thank you very much.
What I wanted to just say really briefly is that just in the last several weeks, the manipulation of the precious metals sector is the most intense that I've seen it in 15 years. It's almost 200,000 contracts.
Jeez.
Yeah.
It hadn't been that high in a very long time.
So just to put that in perspective, translates into 1 billion ounces of silver.
Yeah, because they're 500 ounces per contract,
yes,
right?
Yes, 1 billion ounces of silver, okay? And so for instance, what we saw in the overnight market, and I'm just looking at the gold graph here, is the same thing. What we saw in the overnight market in the precious metals was the gold and silver were basically flat to up during the Asian and Indian session, and then just before midnight, and I don't know what the catalyst was, all of a sudden, the dollar took off to the upside and gold and silver started selling off, and the sell-off intensified when London opened. And then on the retail sales number, which was horrific, gold actually spiked up, and then they beat it right back down, and then we drifted higher. And silver was even more exaggerated, and they took silver back below 15. And in fact, on the day, silver's low is 1577. This is the July silver futures. All right,
that's low.
And the high was 1604. Well, once they smashed it, it actually drifted back above 16, and it gets to this point here where I do think that they're having trouble keeping silver below 16, and I think they really want to keep it below 16 if they can. On the COMEX, it closed right at 16. As soon as the COMEX floor closed, it popped above 16. So silver and gold are both behaving like coiled springs, and I think at some point I wouldn't be surprised if you wake up one day and you're going to see gold and silver up a lot. So I just wanted to sort of preface our conversation with Mr. Jeff Brown with that market update on the precious metals.
Well, thank you for that. And as far as the number of contracts, did you say that you've never seen it that high?
No, open interest in COMEX silver is a record high.
Because I know it used to run in the 150,000 contracts.
Well, for the longest time, for most of the time that I've been doing this, it was running, say, between, 80 or 90,000 contracts, and then it would run up to as high as 150,000. I think when the market peaked just below 50, I want to say it might have peaked out at 166,000 contracts.
That sounds about right. So it's 190,000 contracts, which is
190,636 contracts.
That's a lot. That's a couple thousand more than the all-time high.
Yes,
than the previous all-time high.
Here, I'll do the calculations. When silver topped out, just before it topped out at 49, the open interest hit a then all-time high of 166,000.
Oh,
so what you're talking about right now is the open interest with silver at $16 an ounce versus $49 an ounce. The open interest, it's 14% higher with silver, with the price of silver
a third
of what it was at the peak. So I mean, and well, let's just put the 190,000. I'm just going to, just for calculation purposes, I'm just going to round it to 600, 190,600. So you're talking about 953 million ounces a year. All right. The world produces 800 million ounces of silver a year.
Max. That's
So,
max.
so the amount of open interest on the COMEX right now exceeds
production.
Exceeds global annual production by 19%. And you're going to tell me that that's a free trading natural market? It's not. I mean, it's absurd that the operators of the COMEX and the U.S. government and the regulators would let the open interest in paper silver become so disproportionate and so extreme compared to the underlying, even the possibility of delivering that if people would stand for delivery. There's a reason why they're manipulating silver like this, and why they've gone to an extreme degree of manipulation. There's a reason for it, and we're going to find out. And I think we're going to find out possibly this year. But what it does is it allows the banks and the U.S. government to keep a lid on the price of silver. They're going to have a big problem with silver. This amount of open interest in a futures contract in relationship to the amount of underlying physical commodity that is deliverable. This is unprecedented in commodity history. We've never seen anything like this.
And now we're about to learn about China and their solar demand, which is they're going to be removing 236 metric tons a year of, or I'm sorry, about 300 metric tons a year of silver. And I don't know where it's going to come from. I mean, and if 1%, help me out here, Dave. If 1% of this 190,600 contracts stands for delivery, what's going to happen? Where's it going to come from?
Well, COMEX will have to default. I'm actually looking forward to hearing what Jeff has to say about the solar industry. Forget about what we've been reading about China's solar industry in the media here. I think he happens to have some extraordinary numbers.
Yes, he does. Well, we've got Jeff Brown, returning guest, our eyes and ears in the heart of the new power source, which is Beijing, China, or the shifting power source, I should say. And Jeff, how you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great.
Now, as far as the silver aspect of this, when you're talking about 100 gigawatts of solar panels by 2020, that's five short years from now. Okay.
Yeah. And they have 5-year plans, and the Chinese have these 5-year plans that go back, to the days of, communism and government planning, but it actually works. And they set a goal, and they work very, very hard to achieve it. And so for now, I sent you all an article. The president or the CEO, I think, of Trina, the number one solar panel maker in the world, is Chinese. He's saying that maybe even 100 gigawatts is the floor. It may even be more than that.
Well, if they're planning on just rooftop solar panels, then that could easily be a floor.
Well, that's what's interesting. That's what's interesting is now, since we last talked, there was an article in the newspapers here excoriating the Chinese for, some guy in some environmental group here was just lambasting the fact that the efficiency of hydro, wind, and solar in China is very, very low because they've built up all of this capacity that much of the wind and hydro and solar in China is in the western part of the country, and 96% of the people live on 54% of the land. And so you get out west and there's no one there. That's where a lot of the hydro is, and wind and solar. And so they've got all this capacity built up, but now it's not connected to the grid the way it should be. So now there's going to be a big push to do that. And then secondly, in this 5-year plan, you brought up something. They actually want to now localize solar production. So China, you go all over Beijing and you see these passive, water heaters. They're everywhere. and China totally dominates that. They even in 2009 they had 80% of the passive water heating, hot water heating in the world. I'm sure it's probably 90% now. So they're going to do the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing solar panels on our apartment complex here in the next 2 or 3 years here in suburban Beijing.
Well, I want to know about this 236 metric tons of silver for 1 gigawatt of power.
Yeah, that's
gigawatt of panels.
I found that, and ironically, it was a Chinese guy who did the calculation. I sent you all that website, and yeah, it's 236 metric tons per gigawatt. I mean, that's a lot of silver. And Dave, you may know something about it more than I do, but they use something called a silver paste to make the panels. I don't know exactly what that means.
I don't know either, but that's what I was going to ask you. If they want to do, what did you say, 100 gigawatts of solar in the next 5 years?
Yes.
Well, they have approximately they'll have 33. Well, I'm sorry, they've got 33 right now. If they add the extra 67, like they're talking about, at 236 metric tons per gigawatt of solar, that comes out to 15,812 metric tons of silver they'll need in the next 5 years.
You have a calculator that translates that into ounces?
No.
That's a lot of silver.
Sounds like that's more silver than is available. I mean,
I don't know.
I
don't
the
know.
Production's 800 million ounces a year, right?
Right.
Roughly.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
between 7 and 800 million.
Yeah.
A gigawatt of electricity will in the United States power about 700,000 U.S. homes. Based on energy use here, I think it would power about 3 million Chinese homes, a gigawatt. So they would, right now they're powering about 90 million households here. And if they go up to 100 gigawatts, they're going to be powering 300 million homes here. It is absolutely staggering.
That is staggering.
To think, China has 500 million households, probably a little bit less, 450, 500 million. So in 5 years, they plan on ramping up solar capacity to power 60% of the electrical needs of the households here. It's just mind blowing.
It really is.
If we use 800,000 ounces of silver a year produced, that translates into 22,700 tons.
Okay, but that's per year, right?
Per year. And we're talking about how much? So 67 gigawatts.
Well, no, that's a total over 5 years. So it comes out to a little over 3,000 metric tons a year, which is right at their annual production, which is around 3,200 metric tons a year. So they actually have enough right now to make all those solar panels with what they mine, but I think what they're trying to do is import what they can, just so that they just don't literally run down to zero stocks.
Well, right. If they're using all of what they mine for solar, that means they don't have any silver to make silver pandas, silver bullion bars.
Yeah.
And everything.
Yeah. Well, jewelry and everything else.
Well, industrial processes use about 70% of silver production every year.
Yeah.
So if you assume China's similar in its profile, if they're using all their silver they mine for solar, then they gotta import silver for industrial and investment.
Absolutely.
I actually.
It's staggering. What really surprises me, though, is I did go back. I told you guys I got the silver imports from Hong Kong, and I was really surprised. They had no imports of silver from 1998 till 2002, and then it's consistently been about 25 to 35 metric tons a year from Hong Kong. So over the last decade, they've only imported about 311 metric tons from Hong Kong, and I realize that's not the only source where they could be getting it, but I think it's pretty interesting that it has not ramped up. So they must be getting it from someplace else. 311 metric tons is what, 1.5 gigawatts. So, but clearly the demand for silver here is being driven by solar.
I would say, 67 divided by 5. I mean, that's about 12, 13 gigawatts that they're going to have to do a year.
Gigawatts per year.
I mean,
well, they actually are going to do 17 this year. And, and it's just, the dynamics are, amazing. China now has six of the top 10 solar panel, manufacturers. And Trina, the number one, is now getting into the battery storage, the battery storage business, and they're going to start exporting, lithium, batteries for solar, and they'll be selling those like crazy, probably in an apartment complex like where we live, where they'll start storing, solar energy in batteries, et cetera. So China has just taken solar and just totally dominated it.
But they should, with as many people as that country has, the energy
and with the pollution problems they have.
Well, and the fact that they really aren't. It's really not a motorized country as far as the populace. There's not a significant number of the citizenry that owns vehicle. And when that owns a car, and when that number starts ramping up, then you're going to have serious pollution issues unless they address it the way that it sounds like they are. But as far as
the big cities are already motorized. I mean, Beijing has 5.5 million cars and a population of 20 million. I think that's not as high as the concentration in the United States. But once you get out in the countryside, the vehicles per person drop dramatically. But again, I kind of like this. I mean, this is all being driven by popular protest. I mean, there's actual protests, against pollution here, and so the government is, reacting to the people's desires for cleaner air. So I think it's commendable.
That's pretty cool. That means that Rick Rule is 100% correct in his palladium and platinum play as far as the pollution, because palladium and platinum both are used in catalytic converters, specifically on vehicles.
Okay.
And if you've only got 5 million vehicles in one of the cities of 20 million people, that means that 15 million people will have a vehicle, or a significantly higher number of people will have vehicles than currently do.
Yeah, no, they're still, well, it's the biggest auto market and the biggest auto manufacturer in the world. It's it just, with the numbers and the growth and the middle class exploding. I don't particularly like it, but in fact, I'm actually proud not to have a car over here, because we don't need one with taxis and metros and buses. But it's obviously the thing to do here. It's become a part of the Chinese dream.
Just out of curiosity, where did you pull up all this information about the silver and the solar industry, Jeff?
I just get on the internet and I start in English and in Chinese, and just start pulling this stuff up. The other thing is that that's interesting is obviously 236 metric tons of silver is a lot of silver to make enough energy for 700,000 U.S. homes or 3 million Chinese homes. And I think the interesting thing is, apparently all these solar companies are working madly trying to find a substitute for silver, because it's expensive. And if they could find a lower cost And I don't understand why silver is so. I don't know if it's the conductivity or the reflectivity, or is it the conductivity?
Yeah.
And and so I just but obviously they're apparently Trina, the other companies, the two biggest ones are Trina and Yingli Green Energy. they're working. I'm sure the Germans are too. They're working furiously doing research and development, trying to find a silver replacement. So if someone pulls that out of the hat, that would change the silver market dynamics substantially around the world. Other than the fact that apparently the Indians are importing massive quantities. I don't know what they're using it for, unless it's for jewelry or whatever. I don't know why the Indians need so much, but that would be a game changer if someone can come up with a silver replacement.
You can't. I mean, they've been trying for centuries. So yeah, it has to do with conductivity. Gold is actually a better conductor than silver, but for obvious reasons, you're not going to use gold, because gold right now at current prices 73 times more valuable than silver. So India also has
copper doesn't cut. Copper doesn't cut it.
I guess not for solar.
Okay.
And I think you don't, on a relative basis, you don't need quite the quantities for silver. It's obviously more economical to use silver for solar than it is copper. But and I'm sure there's I'm sure there's some engineers that would have an even more in-depth explanation. But India also has an analogous solar buildup program as China does.
Okay. Well, they're as far as their latitude, they would be ideally situated, especially with all the mountains in the north, and you would think that solar in India would just be phenomenally successful.
Well, it's an economic thing also, because India, I don't know how much oil it produces domestically. I think it imports most of the oil it uses, and China. Oh yeah, China imports and it produces oil, but I think it's a little bit cheaper for China to import oil. So they both have a billion people. So if you're gonna be able to make that feasible, you got to have alternative sources of energy besides oil.
Wow, that screams about how backwards we are here in the United States, because every single rooftop from Tennessee down to Florida, all along the East Coast, and running all the way to the West Coast from that latitude, every rooftop should have solar panels on them. Every single one of them. Yeah. All through Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California,
Oklahoma,
all of those states, every one of them. But we don't, because we don't have any kind of initiative like India and China have.
Yeah. That's because there's no the petroleum companies can't make the obscene profits they can on solar that they can on oil.
That's correct.
And here's the deal. In China, in fact, I was talking about this in my book. And my book was, as I saw these, pylon, high power pylons, stretching off, into infinity. It can't be profitable. It cannot be profitable. And I don't think the Chinese care. I think if they feel like if they could get back their capital investment in 50 years, they're probably happy, because the overriding factor for them is development and taking care of their people. And if it costs the government money to do that, then they'll even there was 2 or 3 years ago, solar was really in the dumps, because they overproduced. They kind of got overhang on compared to consumption, and so other companies around the world went out of business, but the Chinese made sure that theirs stayed in business, and now they've got the top 3 manufacturers in the world. So their model of this sort of state administered capitalism has some very powerful advantages in the 21st century.
What do you think about that, Dave?
I agree with everything you're saying. The oil companies are making more money off oil than they can off solar right now, and it's also versus the upfront cost. I mean, obviously the Chinese government's massively subsidizing the upfront cost of the solar installation.
Oh, absolutely.
And our government wouldn't do that. As soon as it gets a lot more, as soon as oil becomes more scarce and the price goes up enough, you'll start to see more and more people convert to solar. There are solar programs in this country. I mean, I know there's all over Denver, people go door to door, marketing solar panels and ways to finance them and things like that. So it's not like there isn't a push to do solar, but it's not a big concerted strategic push the way it is in China
and India.
Well, and in
India.
Well, in India, yeah, apparently. What's interesting is I didn't save the article, but I saw something where the World Bank. Did you all see that where it said that the oil industry is subsidized to the tune of, like, I don't know, it was like in the trillions. So we subsidize, but we subsidize the powerful and the influential, and without those subsidies, the oil business would not be profitable. So, in fact, the article I read, it said that basically all the profits that were made by one oil company were basically thanks to subsidies and write downs and all these other gimmicks and tax abatements and refunds and everything else. And without all those gimmicks and tax giveaways, oil would be much less profitable, and we would be paying a lot more for it at the gas pump.
Well, there's also that. Plus, this goes back to the 50s when the King of Saudi Arabia, in exchange for the U.S. giving the Saudi royal family military protection, basically promised that the United States would always have cheap oil at their disposal from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. I mean, it's basically a graft payment for our military protection because I know that 90% of the population over there would overthrow the Saudi royal family if they could, but they can't because they got military protecting them. Yeah.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah, this has been very informative about silver. Certainly, you've presented information that's not available in the blogosphere and the financial media in this country.
Which is what we like.
It's fun to do, and I really enjoy working with you guys, and it's really expanded my horizons as I'm writing Xi Jinping's diaries here, and it's a nice break for me, and I look forward to keeping it up. And you guys have inspired me to buy gold.
Did you get the ingots?
I would have already. No, I can't because my darn passport is at the visa office until June 26th, the last day of school. So I'm going to go down on Monday, whatever that is, June 30th or July 1st or whatever. I'm going to go down and buy a 50 gram ingot of gold. So I'm going to try to at least take pictures of the transaction, and maybe even if I can, maybe try to film it. But talk about gold next time, because I've got all those photos I sent you and everything. There's a lot to talk about gold.
There always is a lot to talk about gold. This has been great, Jeff, and I really appreciate all your efforts and getting these facts and figures together. And like Dave was saying, you're not going to find it. You can find it scattered around, but you can't find it all in one spot like what we're doing with this program, and that's, to me, that's a pretty big deal. So I really appreciate all your efforts. And
you guys are going to start getting ready to go to dinner, and I'm going to start getting ready to go to work. So since I'm 14 hours ahead of you guys, so it's Friday morning here.
Yep.
It's mind-boggling to think that we're literally almost 180 degrees away from each other.
Yes.